Hey everyone, Pastor George here for our Wednesday Bible study recap. And I didn't bring my computer to church today, and I'm waiting for someone. But I wanted to do this video while I had the time, and while our discussion was fresh in my head. So you got this disgusting angle, like looking up at my double chin. So I apologize about that, but I do the best I can. So anyway. Today, we went through the end of Philippians. I have my notes right here, where we went through Philippians 19 through 30. And we talked about a lot of great stuff today. And if you can make it, definitely can. But for those of you who can't, here is kind of the recap, brief recap of the biggest point that we talked about. The biggest point that we talked about was what Paul says in right kind of near the beginning, where he's talking about his imprisonment, right? And so he prays about being delivered. So he talked about, what is deliverance? What is Paul exactly looking to be delivered from? We got different answers on that, right? Delivered from prison, delivered from life on earth, right? Going up to be with Jesus, all sorts of things. And then we asked, was he delivered? And our answer was, well, or at least my answer was yes, but maybe not in the way he thought, right? Or in the way he thought, and he could have meant it in a lot of different ways, which is that he died, right? We know that Paul would be eventually executed in Rome by getting his head chopped off. So we have this idea that he was delivered. And Paul's response to this is an interesting one, because normally, we would think that being delivered would be only in the physical sense, right? Of being in jail and then going, all right, like, I want to get out of here, so God, deliver me out of here, that sort of thing. But in actuality, his deliverance comes not that way. It comes in a way of getting out of it, but through death, right? Which Paul would have been fine with, because we move in our next part where we talk about to live is Christ, to die is gain, right? Where Paul doesn't see this boundary of being caught in between these two things, right? He wants to go and be with Christ, but he understands that while he is here, he needs to make the most of the time that he has, and to teach people. So that's what he endeavors to do. And then we get to a really interesting part, and this is where the most of our conversation was this morning, especially the meat of it, was how do we view suffering, and where does suffering come from? And so we'll reverse the order. So Paul states later in this part that we read that both suffering and faith come from God. And he actually uses this really strong language where some translations will say he gives us the privilege of suffering, which to us never seems like a privilege at all. But in actuality, it is, because the goal of a Christian life is not to escape suffering, right? That's what some people distort and say it is, but that's actually not the case at all, right? The goal of the Christian life is not to escape suffering. Rather, it is to have the peace and the joy of God as we go through that. And that doesn't mean putting on a fake face and saying you're okay when you're not feeling good and stuff like that. You can be very clear that if you're suffering from a disease or something, you can say, I'm in tremendous amount of pain, but I'm joyful, right? Because I know that this is not all that is in store. I know that if I do die, that I am going to be with Christ, which is far better than being here. And while I am here, I will use this time to glorify God, right? That's what Paul means when he glorifies him in either in life or in death in this passage. And I gave an example of that, and things like that. But then we moved on to, what is the world, and what is Paul's view of the world because of this? Because generally we have a pretty negative view of the world. We generally are at least fed by our culture. Maybe you don't specifically, but our culture has a very negative view of the future, right? Things are going downhill, and they're going downhill fast. The world is burning, it's on fire, right? All that type of stuff, and there is no hope. But to Christians, we do not have that, right? We actually need to be joyful about the future. Why? Well, we can be sad about these other things that are happening, but we all know that this is within God's plan, and that ultimately God's plan is a good one. Right, and we might not be able to see the full picture, but when we rest in what Christ has done for us personally, right, that we do not need to fear for our immortal souls because of what he has done for us on the cross and saved us from, then we have no reason to fear anything, because we know that God will bring about justice and righteousness and make all things new. So it doesn't mean we can't care about what's happening. We certainly should. That's what Paul is telling us, right? We should care about the enrichment of each other through the strengthening, the bringing of gospel to others, and loving other people. But we can't just be caught up in solely in that, and because then we get too attached to the world, and we can't be caught solely in just hoping for the future, because then we get caught in not caring enough about people, right? These things are balanced, which is why we can certainly hope, and we should hope to go and be with Christ, but we cannot wish for death, because we should see all of our time here now as a time to teach people, and a time to be good stewards of the Christian message. So that's kind of what we talked about. And that's, the good news of that is that all this has been completed for us in Christ. So I hope that you guys, when you have a chance to read this, we did Philippians 1:18 through 30, that you can see that. And I look forward to sharing what we talk about next week when we go into Philippians 2. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.